the nuclear waste of what you've been through can also burn in some way that opens, that becomes the fuel for energy and light. It gets transformed in the reactor of the heart, and you have a power now.
Welcome to Point of Relation with Thomas Hübl, a podcast that illuminates the path to collective healing at the intersection of science and mysticism. This is the Point of Relation. The following episode was recorded during a previous online course with Thomas Hübl. Visit thomashübl.com to learn more about upcoming courses and events. Jack Kornfield, PhD, holds a doctorate in clinical psychology, has trained as a Buddhist monk in the monasteries of Thailand, India, and Burma, and is a founding teacher of the Insight Meditation Society and the Spirit Rock Center. He is one of the key teachers to introduce mindfulness practice to the West. Jack has taught meditation internationally since 1974. His 14 books include A Path with Heart, A Lamp in the Darkness, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, The Wise Heart, and No Time Like the Present, Finding Freedom, Love, and Joy Right Where You Are.
So hello and welcome, Jack. I'm so happy to be sitting here with you. I see you as, one of the big pioneers. I remember when I was 19 or 20 and I read your book, and that it immediately spoke to me. And there was like a deep resonance to how you combine like spirituality, deep practice, contemplative practice with psychotherapy. And so I always thought that that's a great combination. So first of all, thank you for all your work and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Thomas. Can I start with a couple things and then you'll have questions for me?
This is amazing. Fantastic.
A statement and a poem. I think the poem first, because it sets ground for whatever work collectively we're all doing. And it's a very simple poem by Stella Nasanovich called Everyday Grace. It can happen like that, meeting at the auto repair, buying tires amidst the smell of rubber or the grating sound of jackhammers and drills. Anywhere we share stories, grace flows between us. The tire center waiting room becomes a healing place as one speaks of her husband's heart valve replacement, bed sores from complications. A man speaks of multiple surgeries, notes his false appearance as strong and healthy. I share my sister's recent death from breast cancer, her youngest only 7. A woman rises, gives her name, Mrs. Henry, then takes my hand. Suddenly, an ordinary day becomes holy ground. And I think it was Carlos Williams who wrote, "You can't get the news from poetry, but men and women die every day for lack of what is found there," which is to say the lack of soul, spirit, heart connection, that sort of thing. Then the other thing I want to start with in the conversation, we can talk about spiritual injury and healing and all that stuff. Because one of your gifts is really to look at the multiple dimensions of healing or the multiple dimensions of connection. 2 things. First, it's very clear that no amount of outer development at this time in the world with all the issues that we faced is going to stop continuing warfare. It's not stop racism, stop tribalism, stop climate, disruption, stop the kind of things that we all see globally and experience as suffering. No amount of nanotechnology, AI, space technology, biotechnology is going to stop all that, because the source of hatred, war, racism, conflict, exploitation, climate disruption is in the human heart. That's where it starts and where it grows from. And therefore, the outer developments, which are becoming really remarkable, have to be matched by the inner developments of humanity, which is really what our conversation is about. Is okay, we have this outer focus in the world, but we're still steering it. I guess it was E.O. Wilson who talked about us having Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike powers, a recipe for some problems. So here we are, Thomas. We find ourselves in these difficult times, which are not new. These are our human times, and there's suffering. It's the Buddha's first noble truth. There is. And yet we also sense there's a possibility of redemption for us individually, but more than that, collectively. So I'm going to say one more thing. I'm just blabbing, but I'm looking at the students who are listening, and I'm going to throw a question at you as well. This is actually instruction from the Buddha, where he says, live in joy, in love, even among those who hate. Live in joy, in health, even among the afflicted. Live in joy and peace, even among the troubled. Look within, be still, free from fears and attachments. Know the sweet joy of living in the way things are, in the way, the Dharma. And so this is also a challenge. He doesn't say, let's get rid of, disease, and let's get rid of all these problems, but find a way to live with it, a joyful way to be alive amidst it all. Okay, I'll stop. I laid out a few little things just to begin our conversation. How is this?
It's lovely because I'm always amazed. Every time I speak to you, I'm amazed like how fast, you're creating like depth. And so immediately when you speak, it reaches me, like I can feel the quality that you transmit, and it lays a ground for depth. So exactly what you said in the poetry, like that its soul comes into the room. And I feel that when you just spoke, like I can feel soul coming into our space. So, and I'm sure others who are listening now can feel something similar. And so that's beautiful. I think that you already, said many things that are like our conversation anyway. So I'm curious. Like when I listen to you, I hear the depth of your lived experience combined with your deep practice. And I'm just curious to hear a little bit from your life experience also around the combination of how do we reduce suffering through spiritual practice is one part of our spiritual practice. Any kind of therapeutic or trauma work, how can they be combined? How are they maybe bypassing what's needed? And just as you started, this is beautiful. I think it's very inspiring what you bring.
What I'll be saying is what your whole current project is about. So it's not like news to all of you who are listening. A really simple thing to say, and this has to do with the interest in the West in these Eastern practices, which I've been involved in as a Buddhist monk and a teacher. But, there's Buddhist and Hindu and Taoist and all this stuff. Maybe we could port it over to talk about interest in indigenous spiritual practices too. But one of the things that we've done as a group of people interested is we've filtered them through the same problematic lens that is our suffering. In a way, your book and our conversation is trying to undo what happened at the Enlightenment. We'll use Enlightenment in the other way, in the whatever it is, 1600s or something, when science became uplifted instead of just faith in the doctrine of the church. And that allowed for the whole revolution of technology and different ways of knowing. But unfortunately, by discarding the church, it also discarded this whole dimension of the sacred and of our interconnection and so forth. So this is the Western dilemma in this territory that we're talking about, that we've separated form from soul, if you will. And we have capitalism, which has lifted up a lot of people and destroyed a lot of things because it doesn't have that connection still. And in a way, I think all of you who are listening who have some kind of spiritual practice, you feel it. This isn't like news to you, but this is, in a way, this is the humanity's project to reclaim, certainly the modern world's, to reclaim this deep connection that wasn't there. Now, the weird thing is how parallel this is, that when I and various others, friends and colleagues, went to Burma and India and Japan, the Buddhist and Hindu kind of pilgrimage, in many cases, we wanted the deep esoteric training that would get us the fastest road to enlightenment, with very little money down and, with good old Western, know-how and grit. We'd come in and we'd get enlightened. And the problem is that, for example, when I would go to a great monastery in Burma, where several thousand people would come and stay for a month or 3 months and transform themselves in certain ways. I want the deep thing. I want to dissolve my body into light and have visions and connect to the cosmic consciousness, which you can do. It's completely far out. But what was not apparent is that monastery or that training center was held in an entire culture of ethics, of generosity, of interdependence. The people who went there to practice had families and communities back that were cheering for them, and then they would go back and bring what they learned, and the communities were filled with devotion and love and rituals and things. And we said, oh, that's low class. We want the enlightenment, and it was a problem. And there were two parts to the problem. Okay. One is that we didn't see the blessings and riches of the whole interweave. We just wanted, okay, I took acid. Now I want to replicate that in meditation. I mean, we're just getting down here, right? And that created its own problem, even as we brought those teachings here, those of us who did, with the blessings of our teachers, not as cultural appropriation exactly, but they came with us. They said, yeah, do this. But we brought that problem, and people would meditate. And as you know, there was a spiritual bypass. Okay, I don't really have to deal with my trauma. We'll get to that. But there was the cultural bypass. Yeah, we were out protesting certain wars and things like that. But what we didn't notice is, again, that these teachings were held in the bodhisattva ideal of interdependence. And you can't separate your own awakening with the awakening to our interrelations. So people would meditate, and their trauma would come up, or their family suffering, or whatever. And first there was a lot of bypass. Okay, this isn't spiritual. Good God, if that's not spiritual, if love isn't spiritual, what kind of spirituality is this? If you want the experiences, you can take psilocybin, which is a totally cool thing to do. I'm all for it, or drop some acid or whatever. But it's got to be more than that. It has to be integrated and alive. So we did the bypass, and then I realized it. I finished my PhD in clinical psych pretty early as I was teaching. I said, whoa, we need these tools, which are basically relational mindfulness. And if you look at Buddhist teachings, the Eightfold Path, 4 of the 8 steps are relational practices or dimensions. And that starts from the very first teaching the Buddha gave, if you believe the myth anyway. Here's the Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and includes right relationship, right livelihood, right wise speech, right intention with others of caring. He said, you want to experience a free heart? You have to include these, otherwise it doesn't work. So we made the Western kind of cultural mistake of like, give me the high, I want the high and forget all the rest. I don't want to care about my family. The other mistake, James Hillman wrote a book, you may know it, Thomas. Do you know Hillman's book, We've Had 100 Years of Therapy and the World's Getting Worse? He's a very famous Jungian analyst and a cultural critique. And he said, here you are sitting with a patient, so to speak, in analysis, and they're in a naga hide chair with fluorescent lights around them and traffic outside, and they're saying, I have some headaches and I'm a little bit overwhelmed. And we start to talk about their mommy and daddy. We don't realize that they're inhaling toxic fumes from the chair, that 2 hours a day, there are 3, they're in a commute race with all these other people, that we're exploiting the world and they feel it. And none of that is talked about. And that was partly because psychotherapy, thanks to Carl Jung and Ziggy Freud and others, which is brilliant and fantastic, it was individual. Even Jung talked about collective this and that, but that was a little small gesture to the fact that almost all of it was actually individual. So when we come to spiritual practice, we come to a different thing, because there's temples and churches and mosques and native sweat ceremonies and Sundance and all these kind of things. And we come into a very different system, which is really an interrelational one. The Catholic Church knows it. I mean, they want to build their parishes. They have the economic problem that they want to be the interlocutor to God. So Father Thomas Keating, who wonderful, wise Christian mystic, said to me at one point, because he sent some of his monks to learn Buddhist practice to help them. He said, we had a lot of these practices, but when Martin Luther nailed that little proclamation to the door, he said, the church hid them away because they were giving people a direct route to the divine. And it would have put us out of business. So this is a kind of, we're talking together as people who have a spiritual interest, where we are in the world. We know we need it. We've forgotten our interconnection, and that we can't just make it an interior process, that we have to deal with our history and past and ancestry, all of that, which has always been true, but we have to do it together and feel that we're together in it. And so for me, I learned really early on, we needed relational mindfulness, which is what Western psychotherapy is. It's being with somebody else and becoming aware. And we needed communal mindfulness in some way to see it and to practice it.
One thing is certain, that everything is changing, which is not always comfortable, because habits need to change, traumas need to open to give birth to a new version of ourselves. But our souls are calling us, and the global soul, the soul of our world, is calling us constantly to move and to mature, to evolve. And wisdom and maturity, I believe, are the capacity to relate and stay related to the challenge as much as it's possible, and turn the challenge into that growth movement. And we are not the first ones that are going through challenging times, and that wisdom of the former generations lives in us. And it needs to be activated, it needs to be connected to. And also our spiritual capacities. We have a lot of spiritual capacities that we often don't use because nobody taught us, but they're available to everybody. And that's why I believe practicing in a community is powerful. We are creating over 5 months a collective ritual of healing and growth and transformation. So our 5-month course is composed out of many, many elements. Of course, there are teaching elements, there are practices in the main course sessions that we go through. There are, of course, mentor sessions, there are bonus materials, there are live process sessions. Many people are in this transition phase. We are going from something to something new, and we don't know exactly what that is. It's a new commitment to trust the intelligence of life and the intelligence of our souls, that we know that we are on a path.
This November, join Thomas Hübl for the Path of the Courageous Soul, a 5-month online intensive to transform trauma into wisdom, fulfill your purpose, and navigate uncertain times for personal and collective evolution. Visit the link in this episode's show notes or go to pathofthecourageoussoul.com/podcast to enroll with your special $200 podcast listener discount. Today's guest, Iya Afo, is one of the expert guest speakers joining Thomas in the course. If you enjoyed this conversation and want more in-depth teachings from Iya, we encourage you to join us this fall.
A little story. And then maybe we'll talk about religious injury. I don't know. I'm just going on. It's
amazing. I love it. I love to listen to
it. Am I fitting yeah, because then when you look inside and you realize, okay, what's my motivation? So here's the story. Our dear friend Joanna Macy, who is a systems thinker and a great Buddhist elder and teacher and so forth, she was trying to design a different kind of retreat than sitting quietly. And even as you do your loving kindness or your compassion practice, feeling a connection with the world, which happens. And it's amazing when you get quiet, the trees talk to you. The earth speaks to you. It doesn't take that much. But she was really concerned about how to illuminate that deeper connection for people that, yes, you can feel inside, but as one of my Zen teachers would say, one more step is necessary, or two. So they did a retreat called, Council for All Beings, Joanna and John C., the great environmentalists. And they would go and meditate out under, get a camp and rent it for a week out under the great redwood trees or by some amazing stream, and they'd get quiet and they'd get deep. So as you can when you get quiet, so that the trees do talk to you, or so that your sense of this separate body starts to dissolve into the vibrations and light that we're all made of. Then they would send the participants to spend a day out in the woods and by the stream and so forth, and say, find a species that particularly speaks to you in this time, this ecological difficult time. And to be playful about it, once you find one that really you commune with, if anything, change what you're wearing to represent it a little bit. So it's a little symbolic, playful. And they came back together in a council. And then in that council, they were asked to speak not as themselves, but to give voice to the particular species that they were connected to. And someone would sit there and say, I speak for the salmon. Our rivers are drying up. Our children have nowhere to go. Our numbers are dying. I want you to hear that we need water released from the dams. We need clean water and not the toxic things and so forth. That I speak for the salmon. You have to hear me. And someone else would say, I speak for the earthworms, or I speak for the dolphins. What are you doing to our seas where I swim? I can't even hear my brothers and sisters when the big ships go by. And what it did is it changed the individual practice of consciousness to the web of being, in a ritual way, in an outer way. But ritual, like the poem that I started with, ritual is a language, a very profound language. When you light a candle, the fire element, everybody goes, oh, fire is here. We're not just having a regular conversation. I did it talking to the, top brass at Google or something. When I go into Silicon Valley, I light a candle and they go, whoa, we're not in a regular meeting anymore. Or you pour some water, and it becomes a gesture of libation or a gesture of healing the fundamental elements, earth, air, fire, water. I was doing a retreat with Malidoma Somé, a West African medicine man and shaman with a couple of PhDs on the side, and Michael Mead, who you probably know, great mythologist, and Hillman, other friends, Luis Rodriguez, fantastic activist, poet. We were working with gang kids coming out of street gangs who came to be with us, trying to find a way of initiation where they didn't die. And we're sitting there, and they're in the room, and their hats are all kind of on backward, and their hoods are up. And, one of them says, hey, man, you got some poems. This guy's a poet here. You got some spiritual stuff. You got to give us something better. We're out in the streets with 9mm. You get what you got for us, some story. So we paused and said, we can't even begin to answer that really important question, because there are too many people in this room who haven't been acknowledged. Would you go out in the parking lot? We lit one candle and put it on a little bare table. Would you go out in the parking lot and pick up a stone for every young person you know who's been killed?
Wow.
And some of these guys would come in and their hands were full of stones. Like, no young person should know that many dead people. And then say their name and put it by the candle. This is a home girl. This is for Tito. This is for RJ. And pretty soon this whole pile of stones grew. And everybody sat down, and the hoods came off and the eyes open. And it's like, oh, this is a place we're going to get real. And so ritual and symbol become also like that poem. They become a gateway back to the heart, or to our deep connection. And when we have that in spiritual life, then things open up in a different way. So I'll pause. I've been blabbing a lot, but I'm sort of talking around the territory you're doing.
This is amazing. Wow, I love the last example that you brought. This is very powerful with the kids and with the stones. It's very powerful. So that's amazing. I just want to give it a moment, because it reached me when you said it. It's beautiful. And so do you want to expand a little bit just the story, but just what you said now with when that opening happened? So what was the process afterwards? Just to get a little bit, so this
with the story I just told.
Yeah. Like, how did it unfold?
Here's what happened next. And we were inviting these young people to be in a different community, if you will, than their gangs in some way. After that, they began to tell their stories. And there's something about being witnessed if you've been through that kind of suffering or trauma, to hear, somebody gets shot and die in your arms, or you're in a car and there's a drive-by and somebody else shoots into the window. All these things. It's an undeclared war on the streets. And in a culture where young people turn against each other, it's really speaking about the absence of the true mentors and guides. These are abandoned children. I think there was an African expression that said, if a child feels no warmth in his village, he will come back and burn it down to feel the heat. And so these are all abandoned children in some way. And they're also quite aware that they're in communities often where, you worked a lot with the Holocaust in Germany and stuff like that. they're aware that there are trains waiting to take them to prison. If you're born here and you're a young man, especially young women too, 50% likelihood you'll be put on one of these trains. So they're aware of all this. So they would tell their stories. And then maybe Michael Meade would tell a myth about a warrior, because they can see themselves as trying to initiate themselves, which you can't quite do, as a warrior. An African myth or a Tibetan myth about a warrior coming home and bringing the powers that they gained in that conflict, which all these people would back to be a blessing to their family and community. And then other stories would be told, and a poem would be read to say, yes, you're not the first one to be in this suffering. Here's the voice of our wisdom ancestors. Let's hear this and realize how we might hold this and what we can do with it's like the nuclear waste of what you've been through can also burn in some way that opens, that becomes the fuel for energy and light. It gets transformed in the reactor of the heart, and you have a power now. So those kind of conversations and movement, and we had other kinds of teachings and rituals and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, it feels very lovely to me and very strong. Like I love the ritual with the stones and how it opened up immediately. It touched it.
Yeah, it's so simple. It doesn't take a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I went last year, and Trudy and I are about to go again to the Oslo Freedom Forum, which takes place in Oslo. I don't know if you know it.
I wasn't
It's
there.
run by Human Rights International. And it's at the same place where the Nobel Peace Prize is awarded.
Mm-hmm.
Only instead of one person getting the Nobel Peace Prize, they bring together 40 people, all of whom would be easily eligible for the Nobel Peace Prize. And they teach and they learn from one another and so forth. And it's an amazing group, heroic in the usual sense of that the majority have spent time in prison or have been beaten and tortured. And yet here's the women standing up against female genital mutilation in Somalia and has a huge following to do it. And here's a radical and, standing up in one of the former Soviet republics against going back into the Russian fold. And here's somebody from the Amazon working with the indigenous communities to try to help stop the lighting of the fires, who's been thrown in prison for organizing that several times, And the reason Trudy and I were invited is that these people know how to take care of, or how to stand up in courageous ways, like Navalny. There were a bunch of friends of Navalny there from doing the same work. But they don't know how to take care of themselves. And so they get sick, they get overwhelmed, they get exhausted, they get burned out. I mean, I had a dear friend, who's been fighting the forest fires in the Amazon. When she learns of a great new fire somewhere, the next day her menstrual period starts because her body is on fire. And we had to work together using symbols and meditations and understandings of the collective that would allow her to honor the work she does, but not run it through her nervous system and her body. Another story, because it's related, and I'm telling the story in a way because people listening, some of you are on the front lines, and it's not part of our training. You're the social worker, or you're the human rights person, or you're the school teacher where they're trying to ban your books and tell you what you can't talk about, and you're under attack in various political ways or whatever. Nobody gives you the education of the inner life. And we like talk about spirituality, and it's great. I have a vision of the divine. Things are sacred, because we live in a culture that's defined by the absence of the sacred often. But in a way, the first step is just how to care for yourself if you're trying to make a beautiful change, and to feel that your health is connected to the health of the trees and to the people in whatever community you're woven in, that you can't separate them. And so you're not doing spiritual practice for yourself. You're doing it for us. In Africa, Tutu said that when you ask somebody how they're doing, they always answer in the plural. We are well or we are not well, because they might be well, but maybe their grandmother is quite sick. So they say, we're not doing that well. Grandmother is sick. And that's an extraordinary change of language. I mean, this sums up part of your book. Here's another thing to sum up part of your book. The first part, which is like, pay attention. Okay, Einstein said it. And I believe it only because it was written in Scientific American, which is at least a vaguely reputable scientific journal. And he was quoted as saying, if you can drive safely while kissing a girl, you're simply not giving the kiss the attention it deserves. You know, and that's what your book started with. Like, let's pay attention to ourselves, to one another, to the trees and the, you know, the bushes and the grasses and the geese that fly overhead. All right, so I do have a few things. You know, spiritual injury. One of the things about it is that people get into spiritual communities and we get terribly idealistic. Oh, these are the wise ones. Well, it turns out some of them are, but it turns out most of them are human, like everybody else. And I remember early on when I was studying with my wonderful, great teacher, Ajahn Chah, who was kind of the wisest person I ever met, living in his forest monastery. Then I went to this Burmese monastery, and the meditation master was a really skilled teacher at interstates. Here's how you expand your consciousness. Here's how you fill it with light. Here's how you see the entire world dissolving and recreating itself, all these insights and, you know, dissolving the separateness and so forth. He was also a jerk. He messed with the nuns, what he wasn't supposed to do. He threw rocks at the dogs that would come into his beautiful little garden. He shouted at people. And I went, how can I learn from this guy? You know? But then I go and talk to him about my inner life. And he had jewels. Try this, do that. And I had to realize, oh, he can keep his part and I'll take the part that's good. But we aren't taught that discernment. And so we go in blindly and think, oh, it's great Zen, it's a great Hindu teacher, it's a great Jewish mystic, whatever tradition, or indigenous elder, it doesn't matter. Half of them mess up. And then we're at the effect of that. And the effect is bigger depending on how much blind faith we have. So that when I go to communities, and I've been in many that have had the meltdown of what Trudy and I, my beloved, our shorthand is the usual. And you can fill in the blank. Generally, it's, you know, it's around sex, but it's also money and power or whatever. And it's more the men, but not exclusively. Women can be, you know, abusive leaders too. But anyway, those communities take a really long time to heal, kind of almost more than other kinds of injuries, because it's a soul injury. It's an injury to a very deep place in us that we thought was going to blossom. And then the beliefs come crashing down. And you put so much energy into it, and you cared so much. And that is the measure of how much the grief at the end is. And it takes a very long time off. to be able to trust again, to go back. It's disillusionment is part of the spiritual path, baby. Um, it is. It is. You have to see with the eyes of the Buddha, to see the truth of suffering and greed and hatred, and also see that it's not the end of the story, that that's not who you are. Live in joy even amidst it. Live in a free heart, but you need to come to terms with it. Also, two more things, and they raise questions for you, Thomas, and for us. One really has to do with identification, because in a way, the whole spiritual journey is stepping out of the false separate self. Or we'll just call it the separate self. Believe it's false to believe that it's totally separate. We do have unique selves, but they're woven with everything else. So how do we hold this? Ram Dass, when he came back from India to begin teaching in the West with that big bestseller, Be Here Now, and he came back from his guru, and he had a white robe and beard and beads, and he really was, playing the Hindu guru card for a while. He was teaching in New York, big crowd of people, and in the front row, a woman was sitting, and he's going on about, the Bhagavad Gita, or going on about Rama and Krishna and, the Hindu mythology and the ways you can use that to learn to love. And she raised her hand. She said, Ram Dass, aren't you Jewish? Like, what's with all this Hindu stuff? Come on. And Ram Dass said, yeah, I am Jewish, as I am. I was bar mitzvahed. Ram Dass was Jewish. And she said, so what about it? And he said, I love Jewish spirituality, especially the tales of the Hasidim, because they're just, the great Hasid masters are like those great Zen masters. Those stories are amazing. And the Kabbalah, which has these maps of consciousness, it's really beautiful in the Jewish tradition of caring for one another, to kunalam. He paused for a little bit, and then he looked back and he said, but remember, I'm only Jewish on my parents' side. And it was a very witty comment, which he was, but it was also brilliant and deep. When you talk about your ancestors, or your ancestors are the earthworms and the fishes, they're part of your ancestry. And then I remember people questioning Malidoma, I have some bad ancestors. What do I do about that going back? He said, oh, you skipped those ones. It was very, but African pragmatic spirituality, you just skip over those.
Right.
But so I'm really raising the question of identity, that spiritual practice is to be able to expand your identity without diminishing the individual, to remember your true divine nature, and also remember, your social security number, that you have a particular role. Central casting has placed you in this role at this time, and to not denigrate either side, but to feel the connection with all, and then let it empower the responsibility or the ability to respond in this particular incarnation you have. And when you understand it that way, then you can see you have all these identities. You're a parent, or you're a son, or you're a daughter, or you're a Catholic, or a Muslim, or a native, or you're a teacher, or a student, or you're a leader or a follower. The thing is, you're all of these. You're a brother or sister, and you switch hats with your identity, but then you believe them, instead of realizing that who you are is awareness itself that's taken form in this way. The awareness is completely woven. It's the dream of consciousness. So then, all right, so most of spirituality is recognize how to step out of what's called the body of fear, the small sense of self. Not that you destroy or get rid of the self, but you see that it's limited. And when you identify in that limited way, there's fear. When you don't, fear arises, but it doesn't have much to do with who you are. But then here's the question for you. I've kind of gotten tired of the word trauma and the way it's being bandied about. It's become, like everybody has trauma. And now we have to teach trauma-centered spiritual practice, and we have to look for trauma and whatever. It's been a great thing to uplift it, because when I trained as a therapist, 50 years ago, it was not understood. And we didn't have Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk and you and others saying, here's how it shows up and here's how we deal with it. And I began early on bringing in Western therapeutic skills for trauma and things for spiritual practice, because it kept coming up. And you can't do the bypass, or you can do it, but then as soon as you come out, you're the same old wreck that you were before you went in. You had a beautiful kind of enlightened meditation. And then how do you deal with people that you share your house with, or in your neighborhood, or in your culture? So, but it's gone to where it's become a really big focus. And I've gotten, what's the right word? I was going to say somehow tired of, or sort of needing to step away from that trauma word a lot, because it has in our culture a medical meaning. And this is the problem. Oh, I have trauma. There's something wrong with me. We now have trauma therapy. And if I get the right EMDR, SE, blah, 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 whatever, I can heal myself from my medical trauma, and I'll be a better person. And the world will be better. And everybody's coming in with their trauma and they need to heal. It's suffering. It's the Buddhist first noble truth. That's woven into life. You didn't do something wrong. It doesn't have to be healed. I mean, trauma can be healed. There are things to do, but suffering doesn't get healed. There's praise and blame and gain and loss and birth and death and health and illness. Anybody not have that? You can get your money back. Send it to Thomas. He'll send it back. This is human incarnation. And so then the spiritual question sort of divides with a little bit more discernment, I would say. If you have significant trauma that's still impacting your ability to be present in a kind and loving way to yourself and others, you need to lift that up and bring it into the light of awareness, and usually need somebody to help you with it. And it can be horrible parents, it can be surgery and accidents that threw you into the hospital for a really long time and stuff. It can be work, all the big traumas. They don't always they traumatize you in a way, but they don't always have to be fixed. They have to be fixed, and you wrote about it. If they have to be attended to, if they're still running your life in part. That's the call. Okay, let's deal with it like those kids with the stones. Let's tell the story. Let's have someone witnesses. Let's do some healing things, so whatever, so we can shift our identity from being triggered, because the nervous system carries that in the body. That's vessels, the body keeps the score. But that's only one part. Okay, you dealt with your trauma some, or you don't, whatever. The rest of it is just suffering. And it's not medical. And you didn't do something wrong, and it doesn't have to be healed. It's how do you live with well-being in a world that has greed and hatred and love and beauty, and you can't separate them all, that they're woven together. Then this speaks to the true spiritual path, which is, yes, it has those healing parts of attention and compassion, but how do you find a freedom of heart and spirit beyond that limited identity, to feel the sacredness and then actually be the sacredness and the play? So that's the question, and a little bit of a kind of reframe, especially since you're in the trauma industry, right? You're one of the industry spokespeople.
Yes, and I think what you just said And you said something before earlier that I want to come back that I was interested in. You said something about like when when there was somebody sitting in the psychoanalysis chair, and it was very much about looking at the mother and the father. And then you said,
Yeah.
but they felt like that because they were breathing toxins and do you want to speak a little bit to how we practice, or what's the practice to be in this world and bring awareness and change, and also be with the the parts of life that are toxic, that are whatever racist, that are hurting our environmental part, so our environment and the environmental world. So how does what you just said, like we are living in a world of suffering, and how does our practice engage in the society in a way that is harmful or is hurting? How do you, and I know you do also a lot of work on that, the combination between our inner practice and change and our outer impact, let's say. Do you want to speak a bit to that?
So first, I guess it's Reinhold Niebuhr. What is that little beautiful aphorism that they use so often in AA? Lord, give me the whatever to change the things I can, to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? I forget the
Right.
first, the grace or something like that. So in that one long sentence, that answers your question, right?
Mhm.
And if you want to see suffering, you just go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting or something like that. And you see people struggling, in this case, with the brokenness of their own lives and trauma and things that they've experienced and caused, but also that they're sensing that there's another way of being, whether it's AA or there's lots of other things. And that way requires community. It requires a kind of courage to see the suffering and our participation in it, and to step back from it. That very first thing I read from the Buddha, to live in joy even amidst where there's hatred or there's fear or confusion. And that's why people do practice. You need both community, and when you do a practice like a compassion or a loving kindness meditation, and it's called practice because you do it over and over until you really inhabit it. It's there in you. It's your nature, but it's been kind of covered over. And metta, the spiritual technology of it is really quite brilliant as a practice, loving kindness. First, you start wherever it's easy. We're so weird, like, where's the toughest place for me to love? You don't have to start with Idi Amin and Hitler and, Joseph Stalin or whatever. Start where it's easy. The place that's the easiest, the child you care about, a lover, maybe your dog, whatever kind of softens your heart, and then bring a few more in and expand that, and you practice loving kindness. After you've gotten in that place, then you expand it to include family and friends, community around. Then you go to what they often call unnoticed people. Your postman, or the person at the shop where you walk down to, or the whatever. And it's a really amazing thing because you can do the practice of loving kindness. May you be safe and well and sort of hold them in love. May you be protected and filled with kindness. And then you do it and you pick individuals. And I remember, doing this for somebody who was doing a retreat of loving kindness meditation. And after the retreat, I was walking somehow in the neighborhood and I saw that person and I just melted. I go, oh my God, the forgotten one, the neutral, the person that I love you, and it's because I practiced it. And then you expand to other countries or cultures or people. And eventually the instruction is to pick both difficult and then extremely difficult people. And I found in my metta, or in this practice, that I can wish well to anybody. That I can say, if I change the inner intention, I can picture Vladimir Putin and say, may you be free from hatred. May you be free from pain. May you be free from fear. And really mean it, you know? And those are the same words I might say to a friend as well. But it's actually, it's the doorway to transformation of ourselves, and then gradually to all other beings, because then you expand to the non-human beings in all the directions. And pretty soon if you do the whole deal, you kind of dissolve the cosmos into love. So there are practices to do, is sort of what you're saying. First, yeah, you deal with what trauma, if it really encumbers your life, and you get somebody to help you, because you can't do it alone. This is really important. Very rarely. You need it. It needs to be witnessed and spoken and heard and mirrored. It needs a ritual too, often. Just a ritual coming together. But I mean, I'm thinking about this woman I was working with on a long retreat, and she had the trauma of omission. You know, they're the traumas of commission. Somebody beat you, somebody threw you out of the car door, somebody what. The omission was like the dead zone of the family, where you were unseen and uncared for, and you don't exist in that way. And she was talking about that her mother always bought non-fat milk, right? Because she was trying to stay thin while her mother was, while she drank and smoked her cigarettes and whatever. And she said for her as a child, it was like a symbol of not getting. So I went to town and I bought a bottle of unpasteurized milk with a big cream hovering in the top. And I brought it back. And the next day she came in for her meditation report. And I said, oh, I have something for you that I want you to drink. And I gave her this glass bottle with the cream on the top and this huge smile on her face, because not only was the suffering that she'd lived through seen, but that there was a response that says, it doesn't have to be this way in some fashion. I don't know what cut me off on this, but I was saying there are two things. You deal with the trauma as you can, and then you live with suffering. And the point then is, once you can live with suffering, and you expand your circle of compassion, as Einstein said, then a child falls down, you help them up. Somebody's hungry, you give them food, not because you're such a special person, but you happen to have a plate full of food and they don't have any on their plate. And it's there in every child. You know, how many of us know that child wants to take a candy out of their mouth and put it in your mouth, right? I mean, candy that's like gold, it's diamonds, it's platinum for a child. It's like the best. Here, slimy as it is, taste this too. It is who we are from the beginning, that child of the spirit that loves. And so we're reawakening to it in some fashion. And maybe in another language, all of spiritual practice is just about love, because it is. And so then we do our practice, whatever it is, and it can be chanting and qigong and whatever. But if you do it right, honorably, you'll also go through difficulties. You'll get bored of your chanting, or you'll start to do your shopping list while you're chanting, some form of the holy name, or, and you learn to forgive yourself and carry on. And pretty soon you get steadier with it. You realize, okay, I'm just human. I have my foibles, but I can turn my heart and attention to beauty, to love, with all the suffering. And then you find your job isn't to fix the world. I mean, there you are in Israel, Gaza, Palestine, all that kind of suffering. And I've seen it, some of it firsthand in there, and just feel the tremendous pain of these cycles of trauma and violence happening. It's not your job to stop it or to fix it. It's your job to reach out your hand and mend the part that you can touch. And we each have to get quiet and say, what part can I heal? What am I called to do? And this is sort of the bodhisattva dimension of spiritual practice. And one takes a bodhisattva vow in some form or other, which is really a vow to say, I'll devote my life to alleviating the suffering of myself and others, to reducing harm in the world so that it can flourish. That's the task. The bodhi means awakened. Sattva means being a being who fosters the awakening of the heart wherever they go, whatever way they can. And you find your particular way. Some it's an activist, some it might be teaching contemplative practice, but teaching it from the place of interconnection and responsibility. Yeah, let me pause for a second. You might have something more to ask as well. The thing is that we know this. You know, do you know Juan Ramon Jimenez's poem, Yo no soy yo? I am not I, he writes. I'm this one walking beside me whom I do not see, whom at times I manage to visit, and whom at other times I forget. The one who remains silent when I talk. The one who forgives sweet when I hate. The one who takes a walk when I'm indoors. The one who will remain standing when I die. And he's saying to you, you know this, you already understand. It was born into you because it's who you are. And your spiritual practice isn't to make you some kind of saintly person, spare your friends and family. You know, it's really to remember love, to remember, you know, the first thing you do when a baby comes out, you love it. And the last thing, somebody's dying, you hold their hand. You can't do anything for them. You know, sell my portfolio. I'm sorry, it's too late. You know, you can hold their hand in love and say, it's okay, it's natural. Why not in between? And so that poem says, you know this, and you can live through this. And then we need each other. We need to remind each other, and we need practices. Not because you're trying to become some great saint, but they're really practices of remembering, of re-bringing back all the members. It's also true that as you look, the kind of lens you have, Thomas, and I've seen it from early on too. I remember teaching retreats in Germany 40 or more years ago, 45 years ago. So it was a lot closer to World War II then. It was in the 1970s. And people would come and they would sit, and I was this young teacher, and I got a lot of, people would come. And I was shocked to see how much of the Second World War came into the silence of that room. People would come talk to me. My father was a Sonderkommandant, and my family was in the SS, and my this and that, and or we were run out of town, and there was so much suffering. You worked with it that was carried the minute they sat down, and it was familial, but it was cultural, it was collective, and it was still in the psyche. It's not there in quite the same way anymore. It's 45, 50 years later. They have new suffering now. What do we do with all the Turkish people and all who are coming? And, how do we deal with the fact that we live in Europe and we're connected with all this, and it's frightening. And we have other kinds of suffering. But it starts there. And then you acknowledge it and you work with it in whatever way you can because it's been buried. And then you go, okay, who I'm larger than this, as Whitman said. I am large, I contain multitudes. And there's something so much bigger that happens when you're able to sit in loving awareness and say, yeah, this is part of the place I was born. This is my particular karma right now. Doesn't say that much about who I really am, but it's a task. I got born into this one. Let's see what I do with it. I also had to learn about trauma in other ways because I had a lot of family suffering. My father was quite violent. He was a brilliant scientist, but he was also paranoid and violent. My mother would hide bottles behind the curtains in the house so she could pick them up to defend herself if he tried to beat her or throw her down the stairs, which was hard to witness as a 4 or 5 year old boy. But also, he was terrified, all of us, so his sons as well. And when I went to the monastery, I was the peacemaker in the family. I thought, oh, I'm going to learn how to be even more peaceful, and it was a very peaceful place. And I started to get irritated and annoyed. And the monk who lived in the forest hut not far away was doing this and then I started to get angry, and I went to my teacher and I said, I'm getting angry. And he looked up, he smiled, he said, great. He said, yeah, you have to learn about that. That's an energy of our life. Go back to your little hut. It has a tin roof and one window. It's the hot season. Close the window and the door. Put on all your robes. If you're going to be angry, do it right and sit in the fire. Do that this week or this month, until you're familiar with it. And what happened was that unconsciously, I said, I'm not going to be like my father. I'm not going to be a violent, angry person. So I'm peaceful. I'm not angry. But it was all in there, all that rage and everything. It all came out. And it was just there waiting for a little quiet. But it would have been boring to say that was what I did in the monastery. I did it. I did that. We do stuff. But it's not really about the trauma. The trauma is sort of a gateway, if you will, to learn some things. Okay, I'm going to stop.
That's amazing, Jack. I love so much to listen to you. I really appreciate a lot all the wisdom that comes through you when you speak, and combined with all your life experience, it's beautiful. So,
well, James Baldwin said at one point, I can't find the quote right now, that I imagine the main reason that people cling to their hate and prejudice so stubbornly is because they sense that once hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with their own pain. And here he kind of summed up some of the things you're trying to point us to in spiritual healing and so forth, that if we can't be with the measure of tears that's given, if we can't bear our own individual and our collective suffering, whatever your tribe or community or people you came from, then we project it out. It's the immigrants, it's the Chinese, it's the Black people, it's the gays, it's anything to not feel right now in North America, the huge changes economically, or we're going to lose our jobs. White people are going to not be the majority anymore. Where are our spiritual values? All those things. But instead of turning toward our own life, because we can't bear the insecurity of it. This is called the wisdom of insecurity, to learn that it's okay to feel insecure. That's part of our human lot, and to love anyway.
very beautiful. Thank you so much. I feel deeply enriched and touched by being with you, and I'm sure everybody who's listening can take a lot away from your sharing right now. So thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for all your years of good work.
Thanks for listening to Point of Relation with Thomas Hübl. Stay connected and get updates about new episodes by visiting our website, pointofrelationpodcast.com, and by subscribing to the Thomas Hübl YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share about us with your community on social media. Thank you. We appreciate your support.